All right, just a second. Just a little history of why we've asked Craig to come and speak to us about Beacon. Some of us at Nativity went on a civil rights trip November of 2019, and we got us along everybody else that's taken the trip with him got an email about it. So we all got on that were interested. And I think there was 4 or 5 of us from Nativity, and I'm on the racial equity team. So I thought it was really something that would be of interest. So I shared it with our team. There was a 3-minute video that I shared. We've talked about it some at the meetings, and we've been looking for some action, some relationships, some possible legislative support activities, all that kind of stuff, all of which we saw Beacon doing. So he, decided to see if we could pursue it forward. Then we got something from Kyle, who encouraged us to maybe do it along with the homeless team. So this is just kind of a beginning informational to see if, and we just hope that it'll move ahead. And so we thought we'd have Craig come and explain some things to us about it all. And so just so you know why we're here and the future, this is just the beginning of getting some information and hoping we can get a relationship with Beacon. So with that, I think Karen was going to do a short introduction of Craig, and then he's going to present.
Yeah, we're glad Craig is here tonight. His position is Community Connections Manager. Craig Foreman shares Beacon's vision that all people have a home, no exceptions, with both future and current Beacon leaders and supporters. By leading informational tours, presenting to congregations, civic organizations, or businesses, and representing Beacon in public, he works to increase the organization's capacity to provide homes. Craig left a decade-long career as a litigator in order to do this work because home is too important not to support with everything he's got. He received his BA and JD from the University of Iowa, which means he roots for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And he's a neighbor of ours. He lives in Roseville with his wife and son, and also enjoys Minnesota United soccer matches and attending live music shows. So Craig, thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me and for being here. I always like having that Hawkeye fact in my bio because people always key in on that. I did grow up here in the Twin Cities though, so I don't have a dislike, of course. But so with that little bio introduction aside, I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. So as mentioned, I am the Community Connection Manager at Beacon. And generally what that means is I do things like this. Whether it's tours of our buildings themselves in the before times, or going out and speaking directly to congregations and civic organizations, or now primarily via Zoom, I present and inform people about who Beacon is, what it is that we do, and why we think that more folks should get involved. Regardless of how it is that I'm presenting though, I always like to start by asking people to think to themselves, if you were to close your eyes and picture the word home, what it is that you would see in your mind's eye. Now, when I ask that question, I get all kinds of different answers. I'll hear things like warmth, safety, security. Home is the place where at the end of the day, we get to go make ourselves dinner, put our feet up, get a good night's rest so we're ready for whatever the next day might bring about. I'll hear things like memories. Home is where we have family dinners, we celebrate holidays. We do those things that we really carry with us throughout our lives. I'll hear specific things within a home. Kitchen, bed, TV, dog. I hear dog all the time. I hear it way more than I hear cat, and I hear it way more than I hear spouse. Regardless of what it is that people picture when they think of the word home though, Beacon as an organization exists, as a collaborative of now over 100 congregations exists, because far too many Minnesotans don't have that place. They're doing things like sleeping on couches, couch hopping from one friend's couch to another, sleeping in cars, riding the bus or the train all night, camping in tents in our parks, even in the dead of winter. So that is why Beacon exists, in order to reach our vision that all people have a home. We see a world where cars, buses, and trains are just transportation. Couches are just a place to watch a movie, and tents exist only for when you want to get away from home for a little while and go camping and make yourself some s'mores. That's the world that we see, and at base, what we're trying to do is work with so many other partners to build a movement where all of us in the state stand up as one and demand that our elected officials and our leaders make home the priority that it is. Now, whenever we're doing this work, I like to talk about this here. I like to point out the 4 values that underpin absolutely everything that we do at Beacon. Now, this isn't something that we just pay lip service to. Every decision we make is based on these 4 things. And because of the topic tonight, but also because it's probably the most important, I'm just going to mention race equity here for a second. We all see the systemic racism that has caused housing inequalities in our world. When you see folks camping in the parks, you don't have to even see specifically who they are to know that they're going to be disproportionately BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. And that being the case, sometimes people are still shocked at just how disproportionate it is. In the state of Minnesota, of the adult population, 6% is African American and 1% is Native American. So 7% of all the adults in this state are either African American or Native American. But when you look at the folks who are experiencing homelessness, 37% of adults are African American, 12% are Native American, 49%, essentially half, compared to that 7% overall. Doing housing work is doing race equity work. It can't not be. So if we aren't centering race equity in the work that we do, we are not doing our job. So we do that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about our history and who we are, just to make sure we are all on the same page. I know some of you know a bit about Beacon, and some of you might be brand new and just heard of us with this presentation. So we were founded back in 1999. Plymouth Congregational Church in downtown Minneapolis, right on LaSalle and Franklin, a couple blocks up from Nicollet. They looked around their neighborhood and they saw a number of folks who were experiencing homelessness. People like a man named Peter. Now, Peter had lived in the neighborhood for years. He lived there, he worked there, he went about his life there. But Peter had lost his housing. And now, while he still tried to go about his life in the neighborhood that he'd known for so long, when it came time at night to find some place relatively safe and relatively warm to rest his head, Peter had to leave the neighborhood and he had to go someplace else. So the congregation saw this and they looked across the street and they saw the building there on your screen, which at the time was an unused nursing home. And they thought to themselves, can we take this unused asset and use it to create something to meet this unmet need? Can we create homes for people like Peter? So they talked about it as a congregation and they decided, you know what, not only can we do that, but our faith calls us to do this. We need to do this work. So they went to the neighborhood and they said, here's the plan. Isn't it great? And the neighborhood said, nope. We don't want those people here. We don't want the crime they're going to bring. There's already enough affordable housing here. Someone else needs to step up. But the congregation knew that what they were doing was right, so they pushed forward. For the next year, their Sunday morning services were picketed. When one of the leaders in the congregation got married during that year, his wedding was picketed. When the city granted the various land use changes that were necessary on the property, the neighborhood sued. They took it all the way up to the Court of Appeals. But the congregation stood strong, and in 2003, Lydia Apartments, our very first development, opened. 40 homes for single adults who've experienced homelessness and are dealing with a persistent mental or physical disability. 40 homes for people like Peter. Now, a big part of the reason why I like to tell that story in that way is because once I've told it, I get to fast forward and talk about how attitudes around affordable housing can change over time. Because back in about 2016, we at Beacon decided we want to expand Lydia. Where you see that front door and awning in the picture there, we want to put an addition that is going to double the size of the building from 40 to 80 homes. And we went back to the neighborhood and we said, here's the plan, isn't it great? And the neighborhood's response was, actually, can you add more? Because at that point, about 13 years that Lydia had been there, the neighborhood had come to see that not only was having affordable housing in the neighborhood not a detriment, but it was a benefit. It made the neighborhood a better place to live. Now, so that's a great story, but it's a particularly great story to be telling today, because unless something goes wrong, and it might, because closing on financing these projects, our CEO and president likes to say, is like herding cats, but all the cats have their own lawyer. We are actually scheduled to close on that addition to Lydia tomorrow. So we could be breaking ground, on adding that addition, potentially even Friday, but next week at the latest. So Beacon has grown since then. As I mentioned, we're now over 100 congregations across the Twin Cities metro area, and we have 18 buildings. Some of those buildings, like Lydia, are for single adults. Some are for youth who've experienced homelessness. We have family buildings, a senior building. Our most recent building that opened, which opened in August of 2019, is Great River Landing, which is in the North Loop in Minneapolis. And that is 72 homes for men, primarily African-American fathers, who have recently exited incarceration and are experiencing homelessness. So we really try and work with all the populations who need housing. We also have 5 more buildings in development. Those include Cranberry Ridge in Plymouth, which we just broke ground on a couple weeks ago, Vista 44 in Hopkins, Prairie Point in Shakopee, Emerson Village in North Minneapolis, and one that we're particularly excited about, Vivo Seda, which is going to be in downtown Minneapolis, right across the street from the Central Library. And that is a partnership with the Red Lake Nation, and is going to be serving primarily Native folk with the services there that will be provided on what's called a housing first model. So regardless of whether or not you have an untreated mental health issue, an ongoing chemical dependency issue, we're going to get you housed first, and then our on-site supportive service partner, in this case Avivo, will then help the residents with those issues that they're dealing with. And that's really the difference between Beacon housing and most other affordable housing. Most of our homes are more than just a roof over your head, they're supportive. So what that means is we partner with an organization who specializes in providing services to the population who's then going to be living in that building. And then they have offices right there on site in that building so they can provide those services. So that can be things like continuing with education, finding employment, navigating the healthcare system, dealing with trauma, really super big things. And then it can go down to small things as well, especially in our youth buildings. It can be things like, how do you cook spaghetti? How do you do your laundry so it doesn't all turn out gray? Whatever residents need, staff is there on site to help with. But what we've really learned over the now 22 or so years that we've been doing this is that while we need so many more buildings, we need so many more cranberry ridges, so many more Vimosedas, we're not going to solve the affordable housing crisis unless we change the policies and systems that allow homelessness to occur in the first place. Now, the main way that we are doing that, of course, we do it in many small ways as well, but the biggest way is through our legislation, Bring It Home Minnesota. Bring It Home Minnesota was introduced to this past legislative session for the second year in a row by Representative Mike Howard in the House and Senator Carrie Dietzig in the Senate. And what it would do is it would fill the gap that exists in rental subsidy through Section 8. Now, a lot of folks have heard the phrase Section 8 or rental subsidy or voucher, but maybe don't necessarily know what it means. What Section 8 is it's a program that says if you qualify financially based on how much you earn and how much you pay for your housing, you can get a voucher that allows you to pay 30% of your income for your housing, and then the rest is paid by the voucher. It's a great program. But unfortunately, there's only enough money in Section 8 for about 1 in 4 who qualify. So what that means on the ground is we saw about almost 2 years ago now, when the Met Council, Minneapolis and St. Paul opened up the ability to apply to be on the wait list for Section 8. And they received over 45,000 applications. Now, they only had about 7,500 spots on the wait list. So more than 35,000 applications didn't even get waitlisted. And those that did are still waiting 3, 4, 5, even 6 years before they actually get a voucher. Bring It Home Minnesota would plug that gap so that everyone in the entire state who qualifies financially would get a voucher. We believe it would effectively end homelessness in the state of Minnesota. Now, we need to be taking all these actions because, as I don't need to tell you, the problem is enormous. The numbers there on the screen are pre-pandemic. Before COVID-19 hit, we know that in the state there were over 550,000 Minnesotans who are paying more than half of their income every month for their housing. More than half just for their housing. Now, when you're paying that much, if something happens, if your car breaks down, you have an unexpected medical bill, or you lose your job because a global pandemic shuts down large portions of the economy, that is when homelessness occurs. We need to get out in front of that and ensure that there is enough affordable housing for all. And at Beacon, we really feel like we can do that. We have a lot of hope. As one of our leaders, Eric Schroy, likes to say, why are people homeless? Because we allow it. We as a society, we as a state, we have all the resources we need to ensure that all people have a home. We just haven't stood up as one and insisted of our elected officials that they make home the priority it is. As I mentioned at the outset, at base, that is what we're doing at Beacon, is building that movement. Now, turning to racism and housing for a bit here, because that's what I was asked here to talk about outside of Beacon itself. Now, as I said, we know instinctively, without even actually seeing who's experiencing homelessness or housing instability, that disproportionately they are our BIPOC neighbors. And the reasons for that are just so many. And of course, it goes back to slavery. It goes back to taking the land from the folks who were here before us. But starting a little bit more immediately, in the 40s, in the 50s, that's when we really started to see the gap build even more between whites and non-whites. It built because of things like redlining. The federal government saying in its own legislation, in its own rules, we're not going to insure a mortgage for an African-American family unless they're, not even unless, basically ever. The only potential spots that African-Americans had to live and be able to get an insured mortgage was in places that no one wants to live. places near the garbage dumps and trash heaps and industrial areas, places where, as time went on, started to cause health difficulties with the folks who were living there. BIPOC folks were not able to get homes in neighborhoods that were quote unquote desirable. And they were desirable because it was mostly white people living there. So we had the government start things, and it all kind of mushroomed from there. We had things like restricted covenants, with folks putting a covenant on the property itself that said, you cannot sell this property to a person of color, or else we can sue you. Your neighbors can sue you. These things still exist on properties throughout the Twin Cities today. We had things like sundown towns. Many suburbs around were sundown towns where either explicitly or implicitly, people of color knew they could not be after dark or they were subject to arrest. Now, if you can't even be in a city after dark, you certainly can't live in that city. Then we did things like build the highway system. And when we built that highway system, it went right through places where people of color lived. In St. Paul, it went right through the Rondo, cut it in half, destroying a vibrant community. In Minneapolis, it did similar things, both with 94 and with 35W. And it left North Minneapolis off completely on its own, utterly cut off from the rest of the city. We did these things knowingly. And this is just scratching the surface. It's not even talking about blockbusting and so many other things that happened. This has caused an issue, not just with home ownership today, but with generational wealth. That's what I like to talk about when I talk about these things, is generational wealth. Because in the 40s and 50s, my grandparents, my parents, a few years later, they were able to buy homes in neighborhoods that people wanted to live. Those homes then appreciated in value. They became more valuable, and as a result, my family was able to build wealth that first allowed my father to go to college, then allowed me to go to college. People of color were not able to build that wealth. They were shut out from it because the only places that they were able to own homes was in places that were not appreciating in value. This is what today has caused the bulk of the gap in homeownership and in income and everything else we see between whites and people of color. The simple fact that whites were able to build wealth and people of color were not. So what we see at Beacon is we see an opportunity to help with safety and stability of families of color through home. Now, we can't make up for that lost wealth. You know, we're just a nonprofit. But what we can do is we can create a system within our organization and work on the systems outside of our organization to provide that stability so that families will be able to do things like afford healthy food for the family so that people can be healthier, can go to the doctor when they actually need to rather than waiting until the last minute and going to the emergency room, where kids can get a good night's sleep in their home so that they can go to school and actually be successful the next day, where families find themselves less often in a situation where they have to decide between violating a law and providing for their families. So criminal justice results will be better. This is what home can do. It can provide a base where all of these things can improve for all of us as a society and break those cycles of homelessness and poverty. Now, we've seen just so up close and personal over the last year plus now in Minnesota, just how important racial justice is to everything we do. You know, not even talking for the moment about the murder of George Floyd and the uprising that followed, but COVID-19. It disproportionately affected low-income communities of color. It still is. There's many reasons for that, but some of it is, as mentioned, families in the 50s and the 60s, the only places they were able to get homes were near those landfills, near those industrial areas. near, what's the place called? Northern Metal, I think, that is currently having the problem in North Minneapolis. This has caused increase in things like diabetes, in asthma, things that COVID-19 is able to attack and cause even more devastation than it does in healthier folks. That is why, we see the disproportionality of COVID-19. Then the unhoused and unsheltered neighbors, for the reasons I talked about at the outset, just the percentages. And then you get to the anti-Black racism that causes things like the murder of George Floyd. And we have got to take the steps to create a more just society. And that is what we're trying to do at Beacon. But we cannot just do that outside of Beacon. We also, as it talks about at the bottom there, we are working to do the same things internally that we're working to do externally. Beacon is a very white organization, not just in staff, but in our supporters. The Twin Cities are a pretty white area, so naturally there's a lot of white folks here. Additionally, our organization was created under this unjust system, this white supremacist system, and we benefit from that. So we are working hard to change internally to be even more equitable than we already are. We still have a long way to go, but we work on it absolutely every single day because that's the only way that we can truly make the changes we need to outside. And I see a couple things that come in the chat. When I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat right now, but if there are questions, I'll answer them as soon as I can, once we're done here in just a minute with the presentation. So how are we doing this work at Beacon? How do we make home a reality? So that's really what this slide is about. What we do is, generally our congregations come to us and they say, we need a building locally for whatever the population is. And we start to find the other partners and allies there in the locale. City council members, other folks with some pull in the area. And we tell stories. We tell stories of people like Peter, who, when folks hear these stories, you cannot help but build a passion and a public will in order to do this work because everybody deserves home. Then we start seeing private contributions roll in. And that's when the rubber really hits the road because we're able to leverage private contributions into public investment. In fact, we can leverage those contributions 20 or more times, which means effectively, if someone is able to donate $50 to us, we can turn that into $1,000 in public investment. If someone is able to dig just super deep and donate $50,000, we can turn that into $1 million. When we pool all these things together, and with a little bit of time, that's when buildings happen. That's at base what we're working on doing. But it really does cost a lot. We know from our history that launching each new home within a building costs about $15,000 before a shovel even hits the dirt. So in a 50-unit apartment building, we're talking about $750,000 in costs for organizing to find those partners and allies and to tell that story. For our housing development folks to find the right property, to engage the architects, to design the building, all that work that goes into things before we even start with the groundbreaking. That's how much that costs. But despite that cost, we have pledged and we have determined that we are going to double the rate at which we build homes. We're currently in the middle of that, from 50 homes to 100 per year, while at the same time doing that work to just seriously increase the amount of policy work we're doing and get Bring It Home Minnesota passed. Not next year, not the year following, but in some future year. Because of all that work we're doing, we're currently in the middle of a 3-year comprehensive campaign where we're working to raise $3.9 million per year. And I'm thrilled to be able to tell people that since July 1, which is when our fiscal year starts, we've raised now over $3.6 million, leaving a gap of about $300,000 yet to raise. And we're going to get there with outstanding pledges that haven't come in yet, that will be coming in. We know we're going to get there. We're going to raise more money this year than we've ever raised before because people believe in home. And you just can't not believe in it when you've had the year that we've had, when we've been stuck in our homes so much. I found myself saying just constantly over the last year, how can you shelter in place if you don't have a place? We need to make sure that all people have a home so that if this happens again, and knock on wood, it doesn't, but if it does, everybody has their place to shelter. So one last thing before I start answering questions, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give folks the next step. I know you're taking some next steps as a congregation as you consider joining the collaborative, but individually we have some things coming up. So first up, June 7th, that is next week, the Met Council is having a meeting around project-based vouchers. Now what those are is in most of our buildings, each apartment has a project-based voucher assigned to it. So whoever lives in that apartment gets the benefit of Section 8. They get to pay 30% of their income, and the rest is paid by the voucher. So we always get these from the Met Council or whomever before a building is built, so that they're in place, and so that when folks first move in, it's already ready to go. Now, last year, the Met Council awarded us the project-based vouchers that we were looking for Prairie Point, our family supportive housing development that is going to be in Shakopee. This year, the Met Council has suddenly decided that they're scared they do not have enough project-based vouchers, and they do not want to allow us to continue to have those, despite the fact that they've already awarded them. They're not planning to give them anywhere else. They're just planning to sit on them. And we don't think that's appropriate. We think we should still have those. For one thing, having them helps us get the capital financing from the state to actually build the building. And for another thing, like I said, they're not going to do anything else with them. They're just going to bank them for something. So June 7th, the Met Council is having a meeting where they will listen to us. They've already made their decision, they claim, but they've granted us this meeting to listen to us explain why their decision is wrong. So the more folks who can be there, the better. It is, of course, virtual, and anyone who can come, we would love to have you. It's in the evening. June 17th, my organizing colleagues will be hosting one of their Beacon Academy events. This one is on one-to-one skill building. Now, what that is one-to-ones are the basis of how we do our organizing work. It is just as it sounds, someone meeting one-to-one with someone else, talking about what they're passionate about, what they believe in, and finding how that passion and belief can be plugged into the organization. It's an incredibly great skill to have, not just for Beacon, but for any organization, including your congregation. It's how you build power within a group. So folks who are interested in that, again, it is virtual, and both of those events, as with all of our events, can be registered for on our website, beaconinterfaith.org. There's an events tab on the upper right, and then it takes you to a calendar. Lastly, I love telling Beacon's story, and I would love if you know someone, a friend or family who you think would be interested in Beacon, to invite them to one of my Beacon Now presentations, which I give absolutely every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. The topic changes each month. This month is a year in review at Beacon, looking back on our fiscal year and the successes and less than successes that we've experienced and where we go from here. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again for having me, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat better again. And let's see what we've got here. It's really hitting home the connection between unstable, inadequate housing and racial injustice. Yes, Peter, that is absolutely the case. We say home is the basis for everything, but you would expect us to say that. We're a housing organization. But even taking that housing organization hat off, home is the basis for everything. Without home, people are not going to be successful. One question I have is, I see new buildings coming up all the time. I'm also aware of office vacancies in downtown Minneapolis due to the work from home revolution. Speaking of leverage, how can some of the stock be translated into housing for low-income folks? That is a question that is going to be asked quite a bit coming up, because we know that while some organizations are going to go back to in-person, not all will, and those that do are going to need less space downtown. There's going to be a lot of cheap space downtown, and people are going to be looking for what to deal with that. At the same time, there's a residential high-rise going up right on the river. So there's potential for a lot of stock, which is great, because we need more housing at absolutely every income level. There's not enough for anybody. I mean, we are hearing the stories right now about houses for sale throughout the Twin Cities, getting 20 offers and going for $50,000 over their asking price. We need stock. And so I think that will absolutely help. And then it's up to our city governments to have the wherewithal to translate that into more homes at what 30% area median income, which is where we do our work. Individuals making $25,000 or less per year, families making about $31,000 or less per year, and as well as affordable at the 60% level, so folks making $55,000, $60,000 per year. But cities and other localities need to have those rules in place that say, look, you can build this luxury apartment building, but we need affordable housing as well. And you either need to build it yourself or you need to pay us so that we can build it later somewhere else. And that's really up to the individual cities to have the guts to stand up to developers and make that a requirement. Karen asks, where is the money coming from for the project vouchers? Well, it's coming from us. So if it's Section 8, it's federal money, and so that they raise that through federal taxes. If it's Bring It Home Minnesota, which is obviously at the state level, that would be part of the state budget, and that is why Bring It Home has not passed already, and why it's going to be a few more years before we get it passed. Because we anticipate that Bring It Home Minnesota is going to cost the state about $1.5 billion, that's with a B, dollars per year. That's a lot of money. But to put it in perspective, that's, depending on how you calculate it, that's between 2 and 4% of the state's annual budget. Currently, the state of Minnesota spends 0.5% of its annual budget on housing. Simply bumping that to around 3% could essentially end homelessness in Minnesota. We believe that is money worth spending. And we've got a lot of legislators on board. We have 33 co-sponsors in the House. We have the maximum of 5 co-sponsors in the Senate. We understand there's about 15 senators who are on board. They're just not allowed to sign on as co-sponsors. And so that's what next year and the year after that is about, is it's getting more and more legislators on board, more and more organizations from outstate Minnesota putting pressure on their elected officials to make sure that they understand this is not just a Twin Cities problem. The minimum percentage in this state, in any county, of folks who are paying more than 50% for their housing is 10%. Every single county has at least 10% of their population paying more than half their income. This is a statewide problem. And so once we get everyone on board, it'll get passed. It's just going to take some time, but we are in it for the long haul. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Greg. How often is the skill building offered?
It depends on the particular topic, but the one-to-one skill building is offered once a month. I believe it is the third Thursday. I could be wrong on that, but it's something like that. So that one is offered every month. And then they also do things, they're actually, they recently relaunched doing a racism and housing breakdown as well, where it's 2 nights, 2 hours each night, and they're able to really do a deep dive into some of the stuff that I was just able to touch on tonight, and talk about how we got where we are. And then they have several other trainings as well that kind of rotate through.
And the other thing is related to volunteer opportunities. You said that you provide services in a lot of your buildings. Are there volunteer opportunities we could offer to our congregation?
For the most part, no. In each of our buildings, we contract with a service providing partner, and so they're the ones who are providing the actual services. Now, if there's a particular building your congregation is interested in, there is always the opportunity to reach out directly to that service provider and see if they have needs. But because we turn everything regarding the services over to that partner, we don't we take a hands-off approach. We let them do the work that they are great at, and we just make sure that everything's running smoothly.
So are there other volunteer opportunities with Beacon or not?
It's easy to people show. I know scratch the volunteer itch. We had even though nobody could talk, it was just the ability to be there. But we could say to those city council members, there are over 100 Beacon supporters here today. That means so much. With Prairie Point, Scott County awarded us $900,000 for Prairie Point in December-January timeframe. That is the largest investment Scott County has ever made in affordable housing. And it's because people showed up. And they saw our constituents are here demanding this of us. We have to do this. So that's the big volunteer opportunity we have.
Because I think, I don't know, Kyle, you can speak to this too, but I think having the volunteer opportunities would be important to Nativity.
Yeah, I have some questions, but I want to make sure that everybody has a chance. Anybody else have questions, and I can circle back?
So
You're muted.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You've probably had many of these presentations with a group from a prospective congregation that wants to help. On the average, where does it go from here, typically, with a congregation that is interested in doing what you've been talking about?
Yeah, it can go a lot of different ways. So I'll kind of try and midstream it, basically, because sometimes, I give these presentations, and if it's a congregation with, of a denomination with a strong central pastor, the pastor can just say, yep, we're joining and take the steps. Sometimes folks need a lot. There can be several of these meetings, not just with me, but for, we have 4 organizers on staff, one of whom is specifically for Minneapolis, one of whom is specifically for suburban Hennepin, one for St. Paul, and one for the Southwest. I think technically you guys would fall under Emily, who is our Minneapolis organizer. So she has lots of conversations with congregations who are considering joining the collaborative. And she'll sit down with the folks who are expressing an interest and find out, okay, how wide is this interest? Do you guys want to get more people on board before you take, any sort of steps? How do you go about doing that? Do you already have kind of enough of a base to get started? Okay, these are the steps that folks take. So when a congregation does join the collaborative, we only ask a couple things. One is to sign on to our mission and vision, and say, yes, these things that Beacon believes, we also believe. And then the other thing is we ask for a monetary donation that is meaningful to the congregation. We don't have a set number because we understand congregation finances, and what's good for and useful for one congregation is just completely out of the realm of possibilities for another congregation. Then what we ask, but it isn't a requirement, is that the congregation form what we call a Beacon Leadership Team, a BLT, which is generally 6 to 8 folks, can be a little less, can be a little more, who are willing to stand up and say, yes, we want to run things within our congregation for this, and then they become the contact point essentially for Emily. So when we have hearings with the city or with Hennepin County or whomever the case may be, Emily can reach out to that BLT, and then the BLT gets it out to the rest of the congregation and says, we need as many people as possible to show up XYZ. And that's kind of the way it works once we get to that point. But I don't know that there's really a set way for how folks go from here, because congregations are all so different. I belong to a UCC congregation, which obviously is very congregational. And, the pastor has a lot of say with things that go on, but she can't commit the congregation to anything. It's got to go through steps, and the congregation's got to vote on things. Like I mentioned, some congregations, it's completely the opposite. But we make it as easy as we can, and Emily is an amazing organizer. Some folks have met her in other capacities. She used to be an associate minister at Mayflower Congregational Church, and she's just a wonderful human being. I hope that answers your question.
So I'm Bring It Home Minnesota. Are you working at all with other nonprofits that work in the housing area? Because I know LSS has, Gail and I went to Homeless on the Hill a couple of years ago. And so we know there are others who are, and our congregation wrote postcards at that time to the legislatures. So if you could speak to that a little bit, please.
Yes, absolutely. There are a solid number of organizations. I don't know the number right now, but it's somewhere between 20 and 30 other organizations who have signed on to Bring It Home as supporters. The kind of largest of that is Homes for All, which is the collaborative of all the kind of housing organizations in the Twin Cities area. So that includes LSS, that includes AON and Common Bond and PPL and just all these organizations who work in housing. So they've signed on as a supporter. Then we have organizations outside the Twin Cities as well. CHUD, which is a great acronym, but is a collaborative of congregations in Duluth. They've signed on. We've got organizations in Rochester. And as we work toward getting these legislators from outside the Twin Cities on board, a big way we're going to be doing that is by first getting local organizations on board so that, so then we can mobilize that locality to go say to their reps and their senators, we need this in our community as well. But yeah, this is a big plan that it's going to take everybody. I talk about standing up as one, and that's not hyperbole. To spend $1.5 billion per year, it's going to take all of us.
Mm-hmm. So then my next question is there any record of success of people moving out of the Beacon apartments into a more permanent housing or home ownership of a condo, townhouse, single family home?
Absolutely. And the first thing I'll say is that all Beacon housing is not time limited. Folks can live there for as long as they want. You know, they sign a lease just like in any apartment building, and they can renew that lease as often as they want. So with Lydia, we've had residents who have been there for like 15 years. That said, folks routinely move out of Beacon housing and take that next step, whatever it may be. That's especially the case in our youth buildings. We generally see an average stay in the youth buildings of about 18 months. That's largely because we serve 16 to 24-year-olds there, but even if you're 22 or 23, there's no alcohol allowed in the building. And for everyone, overnight guests require very specific prior written approval. And when you're that age, you chafe against those types of rules. So residents are very excited to get out on their own. And generally what we see is residents have stabilized, they've gotten a better paying job, and then with a roommate, they're able to find a market rate apartment. Places like Great River Landing, our partner there, that's the place I mentioned for African American men exiting incarceration. Our service partner there is Better Futures Minnesota, who has been working with that population locally now for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. And they have a very specific program that generally lasts about 2 years. So we anticipate that the average stay in that building will be about that 2 years. Obviously, it's too early to say for sure. But our family buildings, we see folks staying a long time. Because as hard as it is to find an affordable 1-bedroom apartment, finding an affordable 2, 3, or heaven forbid 4-bedroom apartment or home is essentially impossible. So what our first family building was Creekside Commons. That is across the parking lot actually from Mayflower Congregational at 35W in Diamond Lake. It's land that was theirs. It opened in 2010. It has 30 units, and 24 of those units are occupied by the family who moved in 2010, because there's simply no place for folks to go.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Others?
I have a question.
Yeah, John.
What are the metrics of for nonprofits? And you are a nonprofit, I assume.
Yep.
Is you know, what kind of percentages go to, you know, overhead and administrative and all of the costs that must be paid or whatever? What kind of numbers do you have for that is in percentages, please?
Yeah, so usually folks are interested in the cost for administration and for fundraising. That's where, when people ask that question, that's what they're generally going for. And we are about 18% for those two things combined of the money that we raise goes to that, which is right in line with kind of best practices as far as nonprofits go. But whenever I get this question asked, and I get it asked a lot, I always also like to push back against it a little bit. Because in order for nonprofits to do the work that they do, to build capacity, and to truly make change, you have to have the staff to do that. You have to have the money to do that. And so when organizations do spend more than kind of that generally acceptable number, which again, we're in the acceptable number. But for those who do spend more, oftentimes it's because they're building that capacity. And they're hiring the folks on in order to do big things. At Beacon, I mentioned we're in the middle of that comprehensive campaign. A big part of that is so that we can expand our staff. we're expecting in the next 3 years to add about 15.5 full-time equivalent staff members. We only have about 35 staff members at Beacon right now. So this is almost a 50% increase. And that's going to cost us money. But if we're going to get this work done, if we're going to end homelessness, that's what we need to do. Not that I dislike the question, John. I just always like to push back a little bit.
Craig, you made a mention earlier about the congregation giving what they consider to be a meaningful gift. Is that annually? Is that a one-time gift? What does that normally look like?
It's really up to the congregation. Obviously, we like for it to be annual because, we like having the money coming in. But more importantly, we like seeing that continued commitment from the congregation that says, this is still important to us, and we are still, year over year, we are going to continue to put our money where our mouth is, that home is this vital, and that we're going to take these steps. But there's no requirement.
Thank you. How many congregations do you think join the collaborative on average each year? And I'm sure it changes, and numbers don't always tell the full story, like you and John were saying, but just kind of wondering.
Yeah, it's hard to give a really good number right now because with the increase in the amount of policy work that we're doing over the last couple of years, that number has expanded quickly because it is such a big thing to be doing, and people can really see that vision. It's one thing to talk about, the homes and the buildings. Those take years before you actually see a building. But you can go see the Met Council next week. So there's been a big increase. So I'd say over the last couple of years, we're probably seeing around 10 congregations or so. When I started at Beacon, in August, it's going to be 3 years. If memory serves, my talking point was that there were 80 congregations in the collaborative, and now we're over 100. And I don't expect it to be much longer before I get direction to say, you know what, now it's 110. Folks are joining quickly right now, and it's because of policy.
Thank you. One more question for me. I'm curious, this might be something that we would discuss with Emily, but do you know if there's collaborations, congregations that are on that collaborative model that have shared their experience with others who are interested in learning more about what that feels like to be in relationship with Beacon? I'm
quite certain it has happened. But yeah, I think that would be a better question posed to Emily.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I guess I'm just going to make a comment about, I think I'm from the people I'm around at Nativity, there or the book groups I've been or whatever, there is a thirst for some policy work. And so that is nice to hear, Beacon, because I would expect you're an expert at knowing what's going on at the legislature, and working with somebody like Emily, I just think it helps us be organized and get into that kind of work easier than trying to find it.
Yes.
Mhm.
So Ben Helvig Anderson, our Director of Public Policy, is tremendous. We were so fortunate to be able to hire him now about 2 years ago to really launch this. And like I mentioned, we're adding all that capacity and staff, and a lot of that is going into capacity for policy. So there's going to be even more of that expertise to help folks get rolling.
So I'm not muted. So could you, Craig, just explain rent is due what happens the first of the month from, what is it, 8 to 8:30?
8:30 to 9 generally.
Okay.
On the first business day of the month, so generally the first, but sometimes not. Our policy director, Ben Helvig Anderson, hosts the Rent is Due Day of Action, which is a virtual meeting where folks can come and hear from Ben about what is going on, not just with Bring It Home, but with housing as a whole at the legislature. And then hear from another guest that changes each month. Just yesterday, it was Representative Howard from Richfield, who is our primary sponsor of the bill in the House. And you get to hear, some of the inside scoop on what's going on and how things are going. And then at the end, the really most wonderful part, as far as I'm concerned, is everybody takes an action. It's a simple action. It can be calling and leaving a voicemail for the governor saying that you support housing. It can be sending an email to your representative or your senator. It's a Facebook message. Ben comes up with a different thing every month that everybody does. And it's simple, small things that make a big difference and are something that even if you are scared of getting involved in the policy arena, you're intimidated by speaking to a legislator, it's an easy thing to do, and it's no muss, no fuss, and it kind of breaks that ice for a lot of folks and allows them then to move on to doing the next thing. And it's, like I said, it's a half hour. It's not a huge part of your day, but it's a great way to start each month. That also serves to remind us that on that first of the month, people's rent are due. And a lot of folks are unable to make that rent. And really keep that focus on the fact that everything we're doing is for those folks who are unable to make that rent, so that next month or the month after, they can.
I'm just curious too, because the pandemic, did that used to be in person, or was it always a Zoom type thing, or?
Actually, Rent is Due Day of Action started with the pandemic. It was, the first one was April or May last year, while everyone at Beacon was scrambling trying to figure out how the heck we do our jobs from home when we can't meet people in person. That was one of the things that Ben came up with. My understanding is that it is not stopping.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think that would be exciting for people to leave with an action and just, like you say, one call or something and feel like they've done something.
And there's a lot of people doing it. So
Yes.
numbers on one message has got a lot of power.
Yeah, every month there's, I'd say 80 is probably the average of folks who show up to the Rent is Due Day of Action. So it's a good sized group.
So Craig, just an observation, but it sounds like Beacon tries to provide a lot of opportunities for people to get involved, as they're comfortable, and to learn and grow along the way. But it sounds like those opportunities are for everyone, regardless if you're, church that's in relationship with Beacon.
Absolutely.
And then my understanding is, like, making it an official relationship, does it seem like it just kind of demonstrates the church's values and reinforces that commitment to say, yes, you can do things as individuals, but as a community, we care about this in a way where we're going to make sure that it's, always top of mind, so to speak.
Exactly. We talk about the congregations because collaborative's right there in our name. That's at base who we are. But there are so many Beacon supporters who don't belong to a congregation of any type. They just believe in the mission and the vision, and they're there to support. So yes, individuals can absolutely be 100% involved without their congregation. But what really happens when the congregation becomes involved is it builds that community of work and hope within the congregation. And it really, we see it time after time in congregations, how it can revitalize things. And then from our perspective, it gives us it adds to that base of folks that we can call on quickly. If the city of Minneapolis decides at the last minute, we're going to be having this hearing today, we don't have to make 1,000 calls. We can make 10 calls, and then the phone tree starts, and everybody's there. And that's how we can really make a difference.
Well, the other thing I think is important is you talked about a monetary donation from the church, in essence, and whether it's a church budget or whatever it is. But I think once you get involved, the individuals within the congregation will make contributions in addition to the church, if you will.
Absolutely. And, I talked about the multiplying effect of those private donations, and that goes for every donation we get. Congregations do a good job donating to Beacon, but they don't have the money to be the driving force behind $3.9 million a year.
Right.
There's only a handful of congregations in the entire state of Minnesota who could put a dent in that. So it's really about bringing the community together and as one.
So I have a question, Craig. Is there a person on staff that helps? Do you do fundraisers for Beacon? Does the congregation do a fundraiser specifically for Beacon?
That is always an option. We call those third-party fundraisers, where you can have a bake sale or whatever the case may be. Hopefully, we're able to do things like that again sometime soon. A lot of the times, folks, it comes out of their annual budget for congregations. It's really up to the individual congregation. As far as us helping with fundraiser type things that are being put on within a specific congregation, we don't do that because otherwise we would only do that.
Okay.
So we provide any type of information, pamphlets, documents, stuff like that folks would find helpful. Sometimes someone might come and speak, but even that's only sometimes. But generally, we leave that up to the congregation.
Any final questions, comments, suggestions? We start to wrap our time up together.
Peter.
Well, Craig, I really want to thank you for sharing this with us. And I also want to thank all the people that reached out to you and whoever connected with you to make this presentation happen. It's opened my eyes to. I can't say that not any of this surprises me, but it just kind of ties a bow around a lot of things that I've thought about, and it gives me some idea of maybe how to go forward and act out some of my beliefs the way that I think things need to move. So I appreciate Craig and the people that brought Craig to the group tonight.
I will certainly second the appreciation for those who brought me and for each of you who came. This is a big issue, and we're, like I said, we're in it for the long haul, and we're going to get it done, but only because folks like you care and are willing to show up and take those next steps. It's impossible for us to do it alone. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Just a couple quick notes real quick. So Gail, myself, Karen, and Grace helped to organize this with a lot of support from Craig. So what we would like to do is we would like to reach out to you all individually just to kind of debrief and ask what your experience was like, what you appreciated, either where your passions are, maybe where you might see yourself in exploring this further. Personally, I think some next steps might be to have those conversations and then engage with Emily around continuing to grow awareness of Beacon, what they do, and see where our heart is at as a congregation. But this recording will be shared on our YouTube channel for Nativity, so you can go back and rewatch it. You can share it with others to see what they think and what their thoughts are as we continue, I think, really just to explore what this might mean for us as a community. And then along the way, invite people to go to the other info sessions, go check out the skill building, come back and share experience with any of us, or either the housing homelessness team or our racial equity and justice ministry, because I think, we all do better when we all do better. So anything else before we close? Okay, since we're faith-based, unless I hear an objection, I'll just close this in prayer real quick. Okay. God, thank you for gathering us here today. Thank you so much for all the wonderful resources that we get to engage in within the community as we appreciate the diversity of life and experience as people share their expertise and wisdom with us. Continue to show us the way to righteousness and justice as we learn and grow in love. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Let's do the next one hybrid, in person and on Zoom.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks everyone for coming on a beautiful night.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Megan, it was nice to see you knitting.
Thank you, Craig.
Bye.
Bye.
You want to get rid of us?